The Ghost Fleet of the Great Salt Desert. Prologue. The Shadow of the Mountain. The wind that scoured the Bonneville salt flats in 1935 carried more than just salt dust. It carried the faint, metallic scent of a forgotten ocean, the whisper of ancient sails, and the dark, unbelievable secret of a man they called the Navigator. This story, carved into the granite of the Wasatch Range and buried in the brittle records of the U.S. Navy, is a testament to hubris, survival, and the impossible logistics of war fought on land as though it were the sea. Part 1. The Unholy Alliance. Chapter 1. The Mariner's Madness. August 1917. Washington, D.C. The air in the Navy Department's planning room was thick with the humid heat of a D.C. summer and the frantic smoke of cigars. Outside, the young men of America were being inducted into the war machine, their dreams trading streetcars for trenches. Inside, Rear Admiral William S. Benson, the Chief of Naval Operations, gripped the mahogany table until his knuckles were white. Across from him, a man whose reputation preceded him like a storm front, Captain Zechariah Vance, leaned back in his chair, seemingly immune to the gravity of the meeting. Vance was a legend, a mariner's enigma. He was known to have navigated a destroyer through a hurricane off Hatteras with a broken rudder, guided by nothing but the stars and a gut feeling. But he was also known for his wild, unorthodox thinking, a mind that saw the globe as one contiguous body of water, regardless of the land masses in between. "Captain," Benson's voice was a low growl, "let us dispense with the poetry. The U-boat menace in the Atlantic is strangling the life out of our supply lines. They are sinking ships faster than we can build them. We need solutions, not fantastical schemes." Vance smiled, a tight, unnerving expression that didn't reach his piercing blue eyes. He pointed a long, bony finger at a massive wall map of the continental United States. His finger landed not on the eastern seaboard, nor the congested shipyards of New England, but deep inland on the sprawling, arid expanse of Utah. Specifically, the desolate, blinding white plain west of the Great Salt Lake. "Admiral," Vance began, his voice surprisingly soft, a counterpoint to the intensity in the room. "We are losing the war because we are fighting the U-boats where they want to fight, in the deep water, where their agility and stealth are supreme. We need to create a logistical theater of war so absurd, so far from the conventional battleground, that it becomes utterly invisible to the enemy intelligence." He tapped the map again, harder this time, right on the Bonneville salt flats. "The Atlantic is a graveyard. The Great Lakes are too shallow, and their canals too easily observed. We need to create our next generation of destroyer escorts, shallow draft, high-speed vessels, right here." The room fell into a stunned silence, save for the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Secretary of the Navy Josephus Daniels, usually unflappable, stammered, "Captain Vance, that is desert, salt flats. There is no water. The nearest navigable port is over 1,000 miles away." Vance straightened, the confident swagger of a man who knows he holds a secret truth. "Precisely, Secretary. That is the advantage. We don't build them to float there. We build them to be assembled there. We leverage the three most overlooked assets in this war: the vast, untapped resources of the American West, the unparalleled engineering capabilities of the burgeoning U.S. rail system, and the one immutable law of the sea that everyone forgets." He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes sweeping the room of stunned officers. "A ship does not have to be in the water to be built. It only needs to be transported to the water to be launched. and 1,000 miles of rail built across the Great Salt Desert is less visible than 1 mile of the crowded East River. Benson leaned forward, his initial fury giving way to a grudging, terrifying curiosity. "You are proposing we build a shipyard in the middle of a desert and then, drag the ships to the Pacific? That is madness, Captain. The logistical nightmare would be crippling." "No, Admiral," he corrected him, his eyes sparkling with a dangerous enthusiasm. "We don't drag them. We transport them. We use a revolutionary design I've been developing with Baldwin Locomotive Works, an articulated, multi-bogie rail transport system. Essentially, the ship becomes its own railway car, and we don't take them to the Pacific. We take them to the Gulf of California." He slammed a sheaf of detailed architectural drawings onto the table. They depicted shallow draft destroyers, almost flat-bottomed, designed to break down into 3 primary rail-transportable sections. The key was a specially engineered ultra-heavy-duty rail line, the Trans-Desert War Track, to be laid from the Utah Assembly Site through Nevada and Arizona, terminating at a secret isolated bay on the Mexican border, a place he cryptically referred to as the Lagoon of Whispers. The scale was staggering. The audacity was breathtaking. The sheer, unbelievable secret it required was its greatest defense. Secretary Daniels picked up a drawing, his hands trembling slightly. A desert shipyard, a new high-speed rail line, across 3 states, all for a handful of shallow-draft destroyers? What is the real advantage, Captain Vance? Convince me this isn't simply a fever dream. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, finally revealing the true, shocking core of his plan, the one piece of geopolitical leverage that made the logistical nightmare worthwhile. "The advantage, Secretary, is twofold. First, absolute total strategic surprise. Germany's U-boat intelligence network focuses solely on the Atlantic coast. Second, Mexico." He let the name hang in the air. America's relationship with Mexico was a volatile powder keg, especially after the Zimmerman telegram threatened a German alliance right on the U.S. border. "My rail line," Vance concluded, a triumphant gleam in his eyes, "does not stop at the U.S. border. It crosses it. A secret treaty, arranged outside of the usual diplomatic channels, guarantees us exclusive temporary use of that hidden bay for a major strategic base, in exchange for economic aid and a powerful, silent U.S. presence that keeps German influence out. We build the ships in the desert, rail them south in pieces, assemble them in a concealed fortified lagoon, and launch a ghost fleet directly into the Pacific, and then through the Panama Canal. No one on the eastern seaboard, least of all the German spies who infest our ports, will ever know these ships exist until they are sinking U-boats in the mid-Atlantic." The idea was horrifying, brilliant, and utterly, historically real. It was logistical warfare pushed to the point of genius. It was the only way, in 1917, to build a major naval force without the enemy noticing. Admiral Benson stared at the drawings, at the desert shipyard, the winding rail, the faint outline of a destroyer section on a massive rail car, and he saw not madness, but a desperate final solution. "Captain Vance," the Admiral said, his voice now steady and grave, "you have your yard, you have your rail line, you have your authority. But if this secret fails, if one section of that track is compromised, if one ship is discovered before it reaches the sea, you will be court-martialed, and history will call you the man who bankrupted the Navy on a whim." Then stood up, snapping a crisp salute. "Admiral, with respect, history will call me The Navigator. Chapter 2. The White City on the Flats. November 1917. The Great Salt Desert, Utah. The establishment of the Western Naval Logistics and Assembly Command, codenamed Janus, after the Roman god of beginnings and transitions, began with a brutal and shocking swiftness. It was a mobilization effort on par with the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, yet it had to be conducted in absolute, total secrecy. The sheer scale of the undertaking required a massive, immediate population transfer. The Navy needed skilled shipwrights, welders, steel workers, and railroad engineers. They couldn't simply conscript them. They needed the best. Vance and his logistical deputy, the brilliant and utterly ruthless Lieutenant Commander Elias Thorne, used the vast resources of the Utah-based Mormon community, leveraging a network of trust and discretion that stretched back to the pioneers. They offered wages that dwarfed typical military pay, housing, and the intoxicating call of a secret mission vital to the war effort. Within 4 months, a temporary city sprang up on the shimmering salt flats, a white city, its corrugated iron barracks and immense fabrication sheds stark against the blinding backdrop. It was a strange, isolated world of its own. The workers were a polyglot of the American West, native Utes and Shoshone, laying track with preternatural speed. Rugged cowboys turned steel fitters, and highly skilled craftsmen plucked from East Coast shipyards under strict, non-negotiable secrecy orders. They lived under a regimen of military discipline, surrounded by the silence of the desert, their only view the distant snow-capped peaks of the Wasatch. They ate, slept, and worked under the constant glare of a sun that seemed to scorch the very air. The railroad, the heart of Project Janus, was the Trans-Desert War Track, a bespoke, heavy-gauge rail line not built for passengers or common freight, but for carrying 1,500-ton steel ship sections. The logistics were terrifying. Every sleeper, every steel rail, every rivet had to be hauled hundreds of miles from the east, across the existing Union Pacific lines, and then carefully rerouted onto the nascent Janus Spur. Vance was relentless. The track was laid at a furious pace of 2 miles a day, slicing an impossibly straight, lonely scar across the desert floor, heading relentlessly south and west. The fleet. The fabrication sheds were cathedral-like in their scale, vast caverns where the first of the vessels began to take shape. These were not the sleek, deep-draft destroyers of the Atlantic Fleet. They were the Janus-Class destroyer escorts, flat-bottomed, with powerful internal combustion engines instead of steam turbines, and a unique modular hull design. Lieutenant Commander Thorne oversaw the welding process. He was obsessed with the hull joints, the points where the 3 ship sections would meet. "It has to be perfect, men," Thorne would bark over the din of the rivet guns. "When these pieces are locked together in the lagoon, that seam must be seamless. It must take the force of the open ocean. Failure here means 1,000 gallons of salt water 1,000 miles from help." The atmosphere in the White City was electric with purpose and isolation. The workers knew they were building something extraordinary, but none of them truly understood the final destination. The talk in the mess hall was not of battles or sinking U-boats, but of the mysterious, sealed shipping box at the center of the yard, the single armored rail car that held the keystone of the entire project, the massive, specialized articulation hinges and locking mechanisms required to join the ship sections. One evening, as the dry, cold desert night settled and the welding arcs cast an eerie, flickering light across the salt crust, Thorne found Vance at the edge of the camp staring south into the blackness where the rail line disappeared. "Captain," Thorne said, his voice low, "the first section of the lead vessel, hull designation Phoenix, is complete. It will be ready for transport on the Janus bogies in 3 weeks. We are on schedule. But the secrecy is becoming difficult to maintain. The locals are beginning to ask questions about the volume of traffic on the spur. The sheer tonnage of steel is impossible to hide completely. Vance didn't turn around. The moment a German spy begins to investigate a rumored dry dock in the Utah desert, Commander, is the moment they disqualify the report as an absurdity. That is our secret defense. But you are right. We must accelerate the timetable. He finally turned, his face half-shadowed. Thorne, the lagoon treaty with Mexico is finalized. The location is more remote than we dared to hope, protected by a mountain range and shallow reefs. We have a window of 6 months before the Kaiser's spies realize something is missing from the Atlantic supply chain. We need to be through the Panama Canal and in the mid-Atlantic by then. He lifted his arm, pointing not at the completed hull section, but towards the south where the lone single-track rail line vanished. "Commander," he said, his voice a low, gravelly command, "prepare the first shipment. The Phoenix needs to ride the rails. The world will see a train hauling oversized industrial equipment. We will see the beginning of the Ghost Fleet."
Part 2. The Iron Serpent's Path. Chapter 3. The Cargo of the Phoenix. January 1918. The White City, Utah. The wind howling down from the Great Basin was a razor's edge, but the activity on the salt flats was impervious to the cold. The launch day for the first section of the Janus-Class destroyer escort Phoenix was a masterpiece of covert logistics. The hull section, the bow, roughly 1/3 of the final vessel's length, was a monstrous, sleek piece of gray steel. It rested on the specially constructed Janus bogies, a multi-wheeled articulated rail system designed by Baldwin Locomotive Works that was wider and heavier than any conventional train. This was not a flat car hauling freight. The steel hull was the superstructure of the train, its weight distributed across 18 axles. Captain Vance stood on a temporary platform, his breath frosting in the dry air, watching the final securing checks. The vessel's nascent form, a naval weapon on train wheels, seemed a terrifying, beautiful contradiction against the desolate, flat landscape. "Pressure checks complete, Captain," reported Lieutenant Commander Thorne, his face smudged with grease and exhaustion. "The load is distributed within tolerance. She's riding heavy, but balanced." "And the camouflage, Commander?" Vance asked, not taking his eyes off the Phoenix. "Perfectly nondescript, sir. The forward section is covered by custom-made canvas that reads Baldwin Locomotive Works, Boiler and Component Castings, Destination, Arizona Copper Mines. It's the perfect disguise, massive, heavy, industrial, and completely unrelated to the sea." Vance nodded. The deception was key. German intelligence, if they ever saw a report of a train carrying a ship hull, would dismiss it immediately. But a train carrying a massive, custom-built boiler for the booming copper industry in Arizona, that was normal, essential wartime freight. The train was ready. 2 colossal, custom-built steam locomotives, nicknamed Desert Kings for their power, sandwiched the Phoenix section. Ahead of the convoy rode a pilot train, a smaller engine carrying a crew of engineers and security personnel disguised as maintenance workers. Their job to clear the tracks and report any unexpected public interest. Vance climbed aboard the lead locomotive. He looked back one last time at the White City, the bustling secret hub of America's internal war effort. "Commander Thorne, you stay here. Keep the assembly line moving. The aft and mid-sections of the Phoenix follow in 10 days, and keep the press out." "Understood, sir. Godspeed and a clear track." With a screech of iron and a billowing cloud of white steam, the train lurched forward. The Ghost Fleet's first section was underway, beginning its 1,100-mile covert journey south along the newly laid Trans-Desert War Track, a railway line that officially did not exist. Chapter 4. The 1,000-Mile Lie. Mid-January 1918, Nevada and Arizona Territory. The journey was a constant, nerve-shattering exercise in hyperlogistics and extreme secrecy. The Trans-Desert War Track was a feat of engineering, a single line winding through some of the most remote and challenging terrain in the American West. It deliberately skirted major towns and cities, opting for isolation. The biggest challenge wasn't the track itself, but the interchanges. The Ghost Fleet had to use sections of existing, heavily trafficked rail vines, specifically parts of the Southern Pacific, to bypass certain geographical obstacles. This meant operating in plain sight. Captain Vance, now acting as the convoy commander and chief telegraph operator, ran a skeleton crew, enforcing absolute radio and telegraph silence, save for coded signals to Washington and the staging crews ahead. During a scheduled maintenance stop near a lonely water tower in the Nevada scrub, a small group of railroad detectives, hired by the Southern Pacific to look into irregular military traffic, approached the train. They were curious about the massive covered cargo. Vance met them, armed with his carefully crafted persona, a gruff, exasperated civilian engineer. "Gentlemen, you're interfering with essential war materials," Vance stated flatly, his naval uniform replaced by stained overalls. The lead detective, a burly man named O'Malley, pointed at the canvas. "That's no boiler, mister. I've seen locomotive boilers. That thing's curved. It's too big. And the track you're riding is new. Who laid it?" Vance met his gaze, his intensity unnerving O'Malley. "You're right. It's not just a boiler. It's a custom-engineered steel pressure vessel, a new design. It needs that curvature to withstand the pressure of superheated steam. It's the key to doubling the output of the Copper Queen mine in Arizona. And every pound of copper we get is another bullet for our boys in France. Sabotage of this shipment is an act of treason." He didn't need to shout. The word treason hung in the dry air. Vance showed O'Malley a forged, highly detailed manifest stamped with the seals of the Department of the Interior and the War Production Board, documents that were themselves a security nightmare. The manifest detailed the weight, the purpose, and the danger of the cargo, subtly emphasizing the risk of a boiler of that size exploding if mishandled. O'Malley, a patriot but not an engineer, hesitated. He looked at the armed silent guards positioned around the train, disguised as civilian security. The story was compelling, and the stakes were terrifying. All right, O'Malley grumbled, waving his hand. "Just keep moving. You're holding up regular freight." As the train pulled away, Vance allowed himself a moment of relief. The constant psychological warfare, the need to maintain the 1,000-mile lie against the scrutiny of workers, townsfolk, and rival rail companies was almost more taxing than the engineering challenge. Every mile was a victory against discovery.
Chapter 5. The Lagoon of Whispers. February 1918, the Borderlands. The final stretch of the Trans-Desert War Track was the most isolated and dangerous. It veered sharply south, terminating not at a city, but at a hidden, heavily fortified canyon opening just south of the U.S.-Mexican border in a remote area of Sonora. This was the Lagoon of Whispers, the strategic key to Captain Vance's plan. It was a natural deep-water inlet, shielded from the Gulf of California by a maze of volcanic rock and shallow reefs, making it impossible to approach by larger vessels and difficult to spot from the sea. When the first section of the Phoenix arrived, the scene was one of bewildering activity. The Mexican treaty base was a hive of engineers, naval personnel, and Mexican laborers working under the joint command of Vance and a taciturn Mexican Navy captain named Hidalgo. The base was built around a massive temporary floating dry dock, constructed in the sheltered inlet. It was here that the true, staggering work of Project Janus began: ship assembly. The Desert King's locomotives carefully pushed the bow section of the Phoenix onto a specialized hydraulic cradle at the end of the rail line. Over the next 3 weeks, the mid and aft sections arrived on schedule. The joining of the 3 parts was a monumental engineering challenge, the true acid test of Vance's design. The mid-section was lowered into the floating dry dock first. Then the bow section was rolled onto a precise alignment track. Now, Commander Thorne, the key moment, the Janus hinge. The massive articulation hinges were the keystone cargo from the shipping box, precision-engineered steel pins and hydraulic locking collars that would bind the hull sections together, creating a watertight, seamless join capable of withstanding the Atlantic. For 72 grueling hours, working through day and night, the crew meticulously aligned the sections. The tolerances were measured in millimeters. The hydraulic rams engaged, drawing the sections tight. Then the welders, the best in the U.S. Navy, swarmed the hull, creating the permanent seal, while internal fitting crews bolted down the prefabricated bulkheads that reinforced the joints. Finally, the assembly was complete. The Phoenix was a whole ship again, a shallow draft, 300-foot destroyer escort, armed with a single forward gun and a deck full of depth charges. It was lean, fast, and designed to hunt. Captain Hidalgo, standing beside Vance, watched as the dry dock was slowly flooded and the USS Phoenix lifted gently off the cradle, tasting salt water for the first time over 1,000 miles from where its keel was laid. Hidalgo took a long drag from his cigarette, a slight smile touching his lips. "El fantasma," he murmured, using the Spanish word for the ghost. "A ship born of dust and iron. She is a fine lie, Captain Vance." Vance watched his ship glide out into the sheltered lagoon, her engines powering for the first time. The Phoenix was the first of 12 such vessels planned for Project Janus. The logistical nightmare was over. The naval warfare was about to begin. "She is more than a lie, Captain Hidalgo," Vance replied, watching the low silhouette of the destroyer disappear into the morning mist. The Ghost Fleet was ready to sail, its secret mission moving from the American desert to the global sea lanes. The Phoenix and its sister ships would soon pass through the Panama Canal, entering the mid-Atlantic to turn the tide of the submarine war. A U.S. Navy squadron that, according to all records, was simply not supposed to exist. Part 3. The Canal and the Shadow Play. Chapter 6. Running the Gauntlet. March 1918. The Pacific Coast and the Panama Canal Zone. The USS Phoenix, followed closely by the second completed destroyer, the USS Vigilance, prepared for the most crucial leg of their journey, the passage through the Panama Canal. It was the world's most vital maritime choke point, constantly monitored by Allied and neutral observers, and therefore heavily scrutinized by German intelligence. Captain Vance knew the appearance of 2 brand-new American destroyers suddenly manifesting on the Pacific side of the Americas would be a 5-alarm fire for any spy network. He needed not just a distraction, but a complete sensory overload. His cover plan was simple, audacious, and leveraged a common fear: fire and uncontrolled chaos. Vance had arranged for a highly visible, non-critical convoy of old American cargo ships laden with coal and lumber to precede the Phoenix by 24 hours. His crew was tasked with staging a convincing, yet harmless, accident. As the Phoenix and Vigilance approached the Pacific entrance to the canal, a prearranged incident unfolded. One of the old cargo ships, the SS Tuscarora, suddenly sent out a frantic, panicked distress call. A major boiler room fire was raging out of control, threatening the ship's coal cargo and blocking the entrance to the locks. The effect was instantaneous chaos. All available Canal Zone resources, tugboats, fire tenders, and key personnel, including the security and observation teams, were scrambled to the fiery scene. The air filled with thick black smoke, confusing the visual reports of any casual observer. It was into this engineered pandemonium that the Ghost Fleet slipped. Vance, aboard the Phoenix, communicated only with a handful of trusted, high-ranking Canal Zone officials who were secretly briefed on Project Janus. "We need a rapid transit, Captain," Vance messaged the head lockmaster, his voice tight with adrenaline. "Put us through the Miraflores locks immediately, before the Tuscarora fire completely gums up the operation." Disguised as heavily modified patrol craft, rushing to assist with the fire control, the Phoenix and Vigilance were hurried through the locks. Their distinct, low freeboard profiles, a clear giveaway of seen in daylight, were swallowed by the smoke and the shadows of the massive concrete structures. To further ensure secrecy, the ships were painted in a disruptive, dazzle camouflage pattern that made them notoriously difficult to classify or photograph at a distance. More importantly, every single crew member was confined below deck while in the locks, the only personnel visible being a handful of designated lookouts wearing civilian hats and generic work uniforms. A single close call occurred at the final lock. A German-affiliated freight agent, looking down from a high observation deck, managed to snap a quick photograph of the Phoenix's hull as she passed beneath him. The image, even with the dazzle paint and the smoke, clearly showed an unusual, newly built hull. Within minutes, the photograph was being rushed to a coded telegraph office. The message accompanying it was a frantic, confused warning. "Urgent! 2 new, small, fast U.S. patrol vessels through canal. Hull design unfamiliar. Too large for patrol, too low for ocean. Suggest immediate deep cover investigation on all U.S. Pacific ports. Origin unknown. Code the Steel Ghost." The alarm had been sounded. The Ghost Fleet was now a rumor, a whisper in the Kaiser's intelligence circles. But it was on the move. Vance knew the German High Command would dismiss the report as easily as they had the rumors of a desert shipyard. After all, where could America have built 2 new destroyers without public knowledge? The question was absurd. The lie held for now. As the 2 destroyers sailed out of the final lock and into the Atlantic, Captain Vance felt the burden of secrecy lift, only to be replaced by the crushing weight of their true mission. They had escaped the iron serpent's path of the desert rail, but they were now entering the true, brutal theater of war. Chapter 7. The Blind Spot. April 1918. The Mid-Atlantic Gap. The U-boat war was reaching a crisis point. German submarines were operating far out into the Atlantic, sinking freighters and troop transports faster than the U.S. could replace them. They controlled the Mid-Atlantic Gap, the vast area beyond the range of shore-based aircraft and most conventional destroyer patrols. The Phoenix and Vigilance were the perfect countermeasure for this area. Their shallow draft design allowed them to run in waters that conventional, deep-keeled destroyers found challenging, giving them an advantage when pursuing submerged U-boats over continental shelf areas. Their unique diesel-electric propulsion system, while not completely silent, offered a quieter running profile than the loud steam turbines of other destroyers, a subtle but vital edge for detecting the enemy. Vance's orders were absolute. Operate completely independently, avoid all contact with Allied convoys, and rely entirely on coded messages for position updates. They were a secret weapon, and their deployment had to remain a statistical anomaly, a sudden, unexplained surge in U-boat losses in a specific operational sector. Their first patrol sector was a notoriously deadly area off the coast of the Azores. It was Ensign Clara Jensen, a sharp-eyed acoustic analyst who had volunteered for the secret project, who first detected the enemy. Below deck, in the ship's sonar room, she sat hunched over the hydrophone arrays, wearing cumbersome headphones. "Captain, contact, bearing 030, faint but definite, sir. I'm picking up a slow, churning noise, irregular propeller cycles. It's a large boat, likely on the surface and running silent." Vance immediately ordered the engines to half speed, and the ship fell into a near-silent drift, its low profile making it nearly invisible on the choppy gray surface. "Range, Ensign." "Uncertain, sir, but close, less than 5,000 yards. I think... Yes, I'm picking up human voices, faint singing and a rhythmic pounding. They're charging batteries or performing maintenance. They feel safe." Vance smiled grimly. Safety was about to become a costly illusion. The U-boat commander, operating 1,000 miles from the nearest conventional American patrol, felt they were untouchable in the vast open ocean. "All hands battle stations. Prepare depth charges, 500-foot setting. Navigator, set course 030. Engines full speed ahead. We are going to hit them before they can crash dive." The order broke the silence of the North Atlantic. The Phoenix roared to life, the high-speed diesel engines pushing the lean hull forward. The advantage of surprise was critical. The shallow-draft ship was designed to accelerate faster than any deep-sea vessel. Chapter 8. The Engagement. The German submarine, the U-93, was indeed running on the surface, its crew complacent. Captain Heinrich Becker, a veteran of 2 years of U-boat warfare, was enjoying the midday sun, believing his location to be an inviolable blind spot. Then the sudden sharp wail of a ship's whistle, a chilling, close sound that shattered the quiet. "Crash dive! Dive! Dive!" Becker screamed, his complacency instantly replaced by terror. The U-93 began its clumsy descent. But it was too late. The Phoenix had closed the distance, her speed blindingly fast. Vance was now on the bridge, the spray from the charging destroyer washing over his face. "Target astern! Drop pattern 1!" he roared. The first pattern of depth charges, heavy, explosive barrels designed to explode at a preset depth, rolled off the stern racks of the Phoenix. The ocean floor beneath the U-93 was not the deep abyss Becker expected. Vance, using intelligence gleaned from captured German charts, knew this was a shallow plateau, a detail the German captain was too arrogant to worry about. The shallower the water, the more devastating the depth charges. The explosions were thunderous, a shocking concussive force that rocked the Phoenix but utterly savaged the U-93. The resulting blast was amplified by the hard seabed. Below, the pressure hull of the German submarine groaned, then buckled. A massive plume of water, oil, and debris erupted less than 100 yards off the Phoenix's port side. The shockwave felt like a physical blow. "Cease fire! Cease fire!" Vance shouted, already looking for the telltale sign of a successful kill. The signs were unmistakable. A rapid slick of heavy oil, bubbling air pockets, and the unmistakable wreckage of a broken submarine structure rising to the surface. Captain Vance stood on the bridge of the Ghost Fleet's flagship, looking at the sinking evidence. His plan had worked. The impossible machine, the ship built in the Utah desert and transported 1,000 miles, had claimed its first victory. He turned to his communications officer. "Send the coded message to Washington. One U-boat confirmed sunk in Sector Delta 3. Mark it as sinking by unknown patrol vessel. No details, no further communication." The ghost fleet was now hunting. The unexpected, inexplicable sinking of the U-93 deep in the mid-Atlantic Gap would begin to sow confusion and fear in the German Naval Command. The legend of an unseen, unbeatable enemy, a vessel that appeared and disappeared without a trace, had been born. The tide of the U-boat war was about to turn, based on a logistical strategy so absurd, so far from the sea, that no one, friend or foe, could possibly believe it. Part 4. The German Reaction and the Navigator's Bet. Chapter 9. The Impossible Report. Late April 1918. Kiel, Germany. U-Boat Command Headquarters. Admiral Otto von Stier, a man whose entire career was built on the cold, brutal logic of naval warfare, stood staring at a map of the mid-Atlantic. The map was peppered with small red pinholes, marking the location of Allied merchant sinkings, a triumphant red tide moving ever closer to the American coast. But two new pins had appeared, starkly out of place. Two black pins, marking the sudden, inexplicable loss of two U-boats, the U-93, and just 4 days later, the U-112, in the middle of the Atlantic Gap. Von Stier tapped the location with a precise finger. "General, these sinkings are an anomaly. They occurred too far from known Allied patrols and in a sector where our captains felt secure running on the surface. We received no distress calls, only a garbled, confused final transmission from the U-112. Low profile, very fast, ghost." General Erich Ludendorff, who commanded the German war effort, looked unimpressed. "Coincidence, Admiral. A rogue American destroyer, perhaps, or a new British trap. Your U-boat captains are fatigued and prone to melodrama." "With respect, General, the evidence contradicts you," von Stier countered, pulling a newly decoded intelligence report forward. It was the frantic message, "The Steel Ghost," that the agent had managed to send from the Panama Canal zone. Von Stier read the key phrases aloud. "Two new small, fast U.S. patrol vessels. Hull design unfamiliar. Too large for patrol. Too small for ocean. Origin unknown." He slammed the report onto the table. "They do not know where these ships came from. The reports from New York, Boston, and Halifax all confirm no new destroyers have been launched. We are tracking their slipways constantly. So how does America suddenly deploy two, and perhaps more, brand new, purpose-built, highly effective U-boat hunters in our operational blind spot?" Von Stier's mind, disciplined and strategic, recoiled from the most unsettling part of the problem: logistics. It was physically impossible to build a major warship in America and sail it without detection. "The intelligence suggests they are too low for ocean," von Stier mused. "Perhaps they are not surface vessels at all, a new class of armored submersible. No, the attack profile is clearly that of a high-speed surface vessel using depth charges." A young intelligence officer, Lieutenant Klaus Richter, cleared his throat nervously. "Admiral, there is an absurd, unconfirmed, and highly censored rumor circulating through the neutral rail workers in the U.S. Southwest." "Speak, Lieutenant," von Stier demanded. "The rumor concerns a massive, highly secretive rail line constructed in Utah, leading to a temporary shipyard in the Great Salt Desert. It was dismissed as fabrication, a morale-boosting lie, or possibly a cover story for a new American tank plant. They called the operation Project Janus, and the ships, they said, were transported in 3 parts by rail. Von Stier stared at the lieutenant, then burst into a roar of bitter laughter. A shipyard in the desert. Ships built on wheels. The Americans are becoming delirious. Dismiss the rumor, Lieutenant. It is insulting to common sense. We will not chase fairy tales spun by Utah shepherds. Yet the idea lodged itself in von Stier's mind. The impossibility was too clean. The lie was too large to be an effective deception. It was a strategy so insane, it might just be true. Von Stier pointed to a section of the map far from the main shipping lanes. General, I propose a targeted response. If this is a new type of vessel, it must refuel and rearm. It must be following a logistic chain. We will deploy the U-141, commanded by Captain Kurt Mueller, our best hunter. His mission is simple. Do not sink merchant ships. Find and report the location and origin of the Steel Ghost. He will operate solely in the sectors where these anomalies occurred, maintaining total radio silence until contact is made. We will prove that this ghost fleet is nothing more than a few lucky patrols and a desperate American lie. Chapter 10. The Hunter Hunted. May 1918. The Mid-Atlantic Gap. Sector Delta 3. The USS Phoenix and Vigilance, now operating as an independent 2-ship squadron, were sinking U-boats at a rate that defied all conventional analysis. They were fast, they were quiet, and they specialized in shallow water ambushes. German U-boat commanders grew paranoid. The sea had become unpredictable. They began to suspect a new Allied anti-submarine technology, perhaps magnetic mines, or a massive coordinated patrol effort. None suspected a ship that had ridden a train. The U-141, Captain Kurt Mueller, was a professional. He ignored the panicked chatter and followed his orders. Find the anomaly. Mueller was a hunter, and he used his acoustic advantages, staying deep and silent, listening for any pattern of sound that was out of place. He found it late one evening, a distinct, high-frequency propeller cavitation, a sound that didn't match the heavy, slow rhythm of a freighter or the deep thumping pulse of a traditional destroyer. "Hydrophone reports a quick, light vessel, Captain," reported Mueller's sonar operator. "Speed estimated at 25 knots. It is running in circles, Captain. It is hunting." Mueller smiled grimly. He had found the Steel Ghost. It was operating with the confidence of a predator. "Dive deep. Set silent running. We will observe its behavior. We need details, not an engagement," Mueller commanded. For 2 days, the U-141 stalked the Phoenix and Vigilance. Mueller's initial shock gave way to a grudging professional awe. He noticed their unique tactics. They didn't rely on sonar sweeps. Instead, they used the silence of the night, drifting and listening, waiting for the U-boats to make the first mistake. Mueller compiled his report, painstakingly noting the ship's unusual low-to-the-water profile, the lack of traditional funnels, and their staggering rate of speed and maneuverability. He realized their weakness. While fast, they were clearly designed for shallow water. They would be less stable in a major deep-water storm. He had enough. He needed to escape and transmit his report. He ordered the U-141 to surface under the cover of a massive building squall line, the perfect camouflage to break radio silence. As they surfaced, a flash of lightning illuminated the waves. Standing on the bridge, Mueller saw the Phoenix through the rain, silhouetted against the dark clouds. But he also saw something more crucial. An immense specialized supply freighter was rendezvousing with the destroyers, transferring fuel and depth charges. Mueller realized the Phoenix was not simply on a rogue patrol. It was the tip of a sustained strategic operation. He raced to the radio room, scrambling to send his coded burst to Kiel. Target acquired. 2 shallow draft destroyers, high speed, operating with a large dedicated supply ship. This is a sustained force, not an anomaly. They are the Ghost Fleet, seeking escape route. His message, though short, was a complete tactical picture. Chapter 11. The Decisive Discovery. 1 minute after the transmission, Ensign Jensen on the Phoenix was still listening, not for U-boats, but for any foreign radio traffic. Her ears were trained to distinguish the faint, rapid-fire da-dit-da of German naval code from the Allied radio chatter. Captain Vance, code burst, German naval encryption, very powerful signal, only a minute long. They're surfaced and transmitting in our immediate sector. Vance was galvanized. They've spotted the Vigilance and the auxiliary. They know. They are broadcasting our existence. He grabbed the helm. Navigator, plot the origin of that signal. Ensign, can you get to triangulation? Impossible, sir. It was too quick, but the signal strength suggests they are within 4 miles. The storm is our cover, but it's also their escape route. Vance, the master of unorthodox tactics, made a terrifying decision. He knew the U-boat had the advantage in the churning seas, but he also knew Muller was heading for the deep, seeking safety. Abandon the depth charge pattern. Arm the forward main gun with high explosive shrapnel. We will not chase him deep, we will find him on the surface. Vance pushed the Phoenix to maximum speed, using the destroyer's shallow draft hull to full effect. While the deep-keeled U-boat struggled to keep its nose above the plunging waves, the Phoenix skimmed the surface. The U-141, believing it had completed its mission and was safely escaping, was suddenly blindsided. The Phoenix burst through the driving rain and spray, a dark, fast shadow. Muller, seeing the destroyer bearing down on him, screamed the command to fire a torpedo, a desperate, hopeless shot. But Vance was already firing. He did not aim to destroy the hull, he aimed to destroy the radio antenna and the bridge. The shrapnel from the high explosive rounds shredded the U-boat superstructure, instantly killing the radio operator and mortally wounding Captain Muller. The crucial antenna wire that had just transmitted the location of the Ghost Fleet was severed. The U-141 did not sink immediately, but it was neutralized, left crippled and drifting in the swelling storm. Vance stood on the bridge, soaked but victorious. He had stopped the full confirmed report from reaching Kiel. The Germans had the data, but the decisive proof and the analysis, the one that revealed the operation's sustained nature, was lost. In Kiel, Admiral von Stier received the first part of Muller's transmission. Target acquired. 2 shallow draft destroyers, high speed. But the full damning sentence, "This is a sustained force, not an anomaly," was cut off mid-transmission. Von Stier, already skeptical, leaned back in his chair. He saw 2 destroyers. He panicked and sent a dramatic, unfinished report. The Steel Ghost is a pair of new, lucky American patrols. We will adjust our route planning and avoid that area for 2 weeks. The concept of ships on a desert railway is an insult to the Imperial Navy. Captain Vance, or the Navigator, had made a bet on human nature, on the inability of an enemy to believe the impossible. He had won. The Ghost Fleet remained a statistical anomaly, a puzzle, an irritant, but not yet the terrifying strategic threat it truly was. The Desert Shipyard in Utah would continue to build, rail line by rail line, and the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic would quietly, mysteriously, begin to turn.
Part 5. The Desert Legacy and the Peace. Chapter 12. The Fleet Multiplies. Summer 1918. The White City, Utah, and the Mid-Atlantic. Following the encounter with the U-141, the German Naval Command reacted with cautious statistical paranoia, but not alarm. They simply designated the Mid-Atlantic Gap as a high-risk anomaly zone and routed their main U-boat forces further north, closer to the British Isles and the Azores, a subtle shift that Vance had anticipated. This strategic retreat gave Project Janus the necessary breathing room to escalate production. Back in Utah, the White City transformed from an assembly yard into a full-scale permanent naval production center. Lieutenant Commander Thorne, now effectively the factory manager, was a logistical tyrant, driving his workforce of thousands. The rail line, the Trans-Desert War Track, was now fully operational, hauling massive modular sections of the next 10 destroyers. These vessels, designated the Janus-Class, were subtly improved, featuring more powerful main guns and an enhanced, quieter acoustic damping system. The scale. By the end of the summer, the yard was completing one full 3-section destroyer every 5 weeks. The sight of the massive custom rail cars, each carrying a third of a warship, disguised under industrial canvas, had become a regular, if perplexing sight along the desolate tracks of Nevada and Arizona. To the few civilians who saw them, they were simply the big train, a crucial, untalked-about element of the war effort. The crew. The U.S. Navy faced a staffing crisis for the Ghost Fleet. They needed sailors with specialized desert-to-sea training. The solution lay in the local workforce. Many of the skilled engineers and welders from Utah were enlisted directly into the Navy, given immediate officer training, and shipped with the very vessels they built. They were sailors who understood the integrity of every weld, every joint. A unique, fiercely loyal crew known by the nickname the Rivet Dogs. By November 1918, a full squadron of 6 Janus-Class destroyers, the Ghost Fleet, was operating in the Atlantic. Their effect was profound. U-boat sinkings in their sector increased by 400%, far exceeding the performance of conventional Atlantic patrols. The sheer unpredictability and speed of the Ghost Fleet began to break the morale of the U-boat captains, who dubbed the vessels Die Salzschiffe, the salt ships, whispering that they were cursed ships, born of the desert and guided by the devil. This sustained, mysterious pressure was a key, unacknowledged factor in the German High Command's decision to sue for peace. The Kaiser could tolerate heavy losses, but he could not tolerate the total disruption of his submarine campaign by a threat he could not identify or locate. The Ghost Fleet had created a crippling strategic uncertainty. Chapter 13. Armistice and Secrecy. November 11, 1918. The Lagoon of Whispers, Mexico. The guns fell silent across Europe. In the remote, sun-drenched Lagoon of Whispers, Captain Vance received the news via a coded teletype message. He gathered his officers and the crew of the 6 destroyers now moored in the sheltered bay. The atmosphere was one of quiet, profound exhaustion, not celebration. They had won a war in secret, and now they faced the challenge of making their victory vanish. "Gentlemen, the armistice is signed," Vance announced, his voice raspy. "We have won, and we did so, largely, because the enemy never knew we existed." Vance revealed the next and most crucial order from Washington. Project Janus was to be erased. The terms of the naval treaties being drafted in Europe would place strict limits on the number and tonnage of American destroyers. The unique Janus-Class vessels, which officially did not exist on any manifest, presented a massive diplomatic problem. They were a violation of future treaty limits before the ink was dry. Vance's final mission, the true test of the Navigator, was to dissolve the Ghost Fleet without a trace. The fleet, the 6 operational destroyers, all pristine and virtually new, were sailed to a remote deep-water anchorage off the coast of Central America, far from the prying eyes of post-war commissions. Their final fate was sealed. They were to be scuttled, that is, deliberately sunk, in deep water, their precise location recorded only in a single sealed document held by the CNO. The base. The base at the Lagoon of Whispers was dismantled by the Mexican government under a highly lucrative secret agreement with the U.S.
All steel, concrete, and equipment were removed, leaving the bay as pristine and remote as they had found it. The rail track. The Trans-Desert War Track was ripped up. The steel rails were sold for scrap to various commercial enterprises across the West, deliberately fragmented to ensure no single party could reconstruct its origin or destination. The ballast and ties were left to the desert, quickly reclaimed by the shifting sands and heat. Captain Vance supervised the methodical, heartbreaking destruction of his life's work. The Phoenix was the last ship he personally oversaw sinking. As she slipped beneath the waves, he stood on the deck of the supply auxiliary, watching his ghost ship disappear into the silence of the ocean. Chapter 14. The Final Account. 1920. Retired to Utah. Captain Zechariah Vance retired from the Navy under a cloud of quiet, official mediocrity. His war record was largely empty. His operational achievements were filed under the highest level of classification. He accepted a government grant to settle in Utah, near the now dismantled White City site. Vance spent the rest of his days not at sea, but working on a large ranch near the Salt Flats. He never spoke of the war. His knowledge was sealed by the Espionage Act and his own deep sense of professional duty. One day, in 1935, a young, ambitious historian from the Naval War College, Dr. Eleanor Roth, sought him out. She was researching the bizarre, sudden drop in U-boat effectiveness in the mid-Atlantic in 1918. Dr. Roth found Vance in his small study, surrounded by navigation charts of the mid-Atlantic, charts that had lines of patrol drawn on them that matched no official naval records. "Captain Vance," she began, "my research shows a statistical anomaly, a ghost fleet of vessels that performed brilliantly but never existed. I found a single surviving manifest fragment for a heavy rail shipment, Baldwin Locomotive Works, boiler and component castings, that matches the timing and route of a new military rail line built through the desert. Is it possible, Captain, that the Navy built destroyers in Utah?" Vance, who was now an old man with eyes still sharp from the desert sun, looked at the young woman. He walked to the window and pointed across the vast, shimmering salt flats, where the faint, barely visible scar of the old war track could still be discerned in the glare. "Doctor," he said softly, breaking a silence he had kept for nearly 2 decades, "a warship is defined by its purpose, not its birthplace. Those ships were born of necessity. They were built in the silence, transported on the land, and launched in secret. And because of that, they won a war that the world only saw fought on the water." He turned back to her, a faint, knowing smile on his face, the look of a man who held one of history's great secrets. Project Janus was the only time in history that the American West built the American Navy. They were real, they did their work, and they were retired honorably. And that, Doctor, is the only official account you will ever receive. Captain Zechariah Vance, the Navigator, took the secret of the Ghost Fleet to his grave. The story became a piece of forgotten American folklore, too outlandish to be anything but a tall tale, the incredible, improbable legend of the ships that sailed the desert.